Welcome to Defense Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: a mini Amazon.com gives hope to troubled Kosovo. Meet the 81-year-old Navy vet and TikTok influencer with 53 million likes. Rishi Sunak's Rwanda planned risks sparking a constitutional tug-of-war in the UK. Djibouti, a political history. Moscow's heavy shadow, the violent collapse of the USSR. A mini Amazon.com gives hope to troubled Kosovo. Bloomberg. Kosovo-based tech firm Girafa aims to become the mini Amazon.com of the Balkans, as it shifts its focus to e-commerce. The company is in talks with investors to secure financing for expansion into Bulgaria, Montenegro and Serbia, with hopes to triple its workforce and sales. Girafa's plans reflect optimism for Kosovo's economy, which relies heavily on outside aid and remittances. The country's future depends on the success of companies like Girafa and the optimism of its young citizens. Meet the 81-year-old Navy vet and TikTok influencer with 53 million likes. Yahoo! Kenny Jerry, an 81-year-old Navy veteran, has gained a large following on social media platform TikTok, where he spreads joy and kindness. After his mobility scooter broke down, his friends started a GoFundMe campaign to raise money for a new one. The campaign received an overwhelming response, raising nearly $150,000. With the funds, the patriotic Kenny Foundation was created to provide mobility scooters to veterans in need. Since its inception, the foundation has given away 87 scooters. Kenny is passionate about the Navy and is excited to attend his first Army-Navy game. He is also enthusiastic about his foundation's mission to honor and empower veterans with mobility scooters. Rishi Sunak's Rwanda planned risks sparking a constitutional tug-of-war in the UK. Bloomberg. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's proposed legislation to block court challenges to his migrant deportation policy has raised concerns over constitutional rights and the relationship between Parliament and the courts. The legislation, introduced last week, declares Rwanda a safe country for migrants and removes grounds for asylum seekers to challenge deportation. Critics argue the bill undermines the judiciary and established legal rights. Sunak's attempt to appease Conservative Party members with anti-immigration views that the bill does not go far enough has raised further concerns. The legislation will be voted on in the House of Commons on October 19. Djibouti, a political history. Foreign affairs. This article discusses the political history of Djibouti, a country that gained independence from France in 1977. The country, located between Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia, is known for its strategic location and hosting of military bases. However, its domestic politics, including a long civil war in the 1990s, receives less attention. The book being reviewed criticizes Djibouti's post-independence record, highlighting the dominance of two strongmen and the use of repression and clientelism to stay in power. The country's politics is also influenced by ethnic conflict between the majority Isa group and the smaller Afar group. The author argues that the regime has sought to co-opt ethnic elites to manage the conflict, resulting in a system that benefits elites and neglects the needs of ordinary citizens. Moscow's heavy shadow, the violent collapse of the USSR. Foreign affairs. The article discusses a new book by Adib Khalid, entitled Making Uzbekistan, Nation, Empire, and Revolution in the Early USSR, which explores the history of Uzbekistan and its relationship with the Soviet Union. The book argues that the Soviet Union's policies in Uzbekistan were largely responsible for the country's economic and political problems. The author claims that the Soviet Union's decision to prioritize the development of industry over agriculture led to widespread poverty and food shortages. Additionally, the book argues that the Soviet Union's efforts to promote secularism and suppress traditional religious practices in Uzbekistan further alienated the population and contributed to political instability. The article concludes by praising the book for shedding light on an often overlooked aspect of Soviet history. Getting Russia right. Foreign affairs. The United States bears significant responsibility for the current state of U.S.-Russian relations, which have reached Cold War hostility, according to expert Thomas Graham. He argues that the U.S. was deluded by Russia's weakness after the collapse of the Soviet Union and failed to recognize Russia's sense of itself as a great power with security concerns. The U.S. attempted to transform Russia into a free market democracy, but this was seen as insincere as it also hedged against Russia's great power aspirations. Graham suggests that the U.S. needs to reassess its goals and limits of power and view its rivalry with Russia in terms of geopolitical competition rather than as an existential contest between good and evil. An unsettled nation, Moldova in the geopolitics of Russia, Romania, and Ukraine. Foreign affairs. This article discusses the small country of Moldova and its breakaway province of Transnistria, which has been under Russian military occupation since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The article traces the history of Transnistria and attributes its separatist tendencies to the different nation-building policies of Romania and the Soviet Union, as well as the outcome of the civil war in Moldova. The article criticizes the ham-fisted negotiations to reunify the nation and the influence of foreign countries in further separating Moldova and Transnistria. However, it suggests that more information is needed on the economic prospects, political leadership, and institutional construction of Transnistria today. On wars, foreign affairs. In this article, the author discusses a new book by sociologist and historian Michael Mann, who seeks to develop a theory of war in order to foster peace. The author notes that war is too complex and varied to be distilled into a single theory, but the journey of exploring debates about warfare is worthwhile. Mann explores arguments about the first wars, the value of realist theories of war, and the decline of wars according to psychologist Steven Pinker. The author also discusses why societies are prone to war and whether those who wage wars are enthusiastic for the fight. Mann finds it difficult to see the rational purposes of wars, as their consequences are usually awful and counterproductive. He argues that wars are produced by the choices of leaders who have been shaped by institutions and norms, and that preventing war requires developing social conditions that encourage restraint and diplomacy. Climate talks always fail, but they are failing better. Bloomberg. The draft text of the COP28 climate summit in Dubai calls for a rapid decline in coal usage and a reduction in all fossil fuels to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. However, the text has been described as clearly insufficient by the EU's climate commissioner and a death warrant by the Marshall Islands. The draft will be voted on by all 198 parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change on Tuesday. The UNFCCC's lack of legal weight and the ability of a single country to veto proceedings have been cited as reasons for the weakness of the text. Gaza destruction worse than in World War II. Germany, EU's top diplomat says. Japan Times. The European Union's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, has described the situation in Gaza as catastrophic and apocalyptic, with destruction exceeding that of Germany in World War II. Borrell also expressed concern over the high number of civilian casualties resulting from Israel's military response to Hamas attacks. He condemned the Israeli government's decision to approve more housing units in Jerusalem, which the EU considers a violation of international law. Additionally, Borrell expressed alarm over the violence in the West Bank by extremist settlers. That's all for today's news from the 6 Degree World. Let's quickly recap what we've learned. Girafa, a tech firm in Kosovo, aims to become the mini Amazon.com of the Balkans, reflecting optimism for Kosovo's economy. Kenny Jerry, an 81-year-old Navy veteran, has gained a large following on TikTok and started the patriotic Kenny Foundation to provide mobility scooters to veterans in need. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's proposed legislation to block court challenges to his migrant deportation policy has raised concerns over constitutional rights and the relationship between Parliament and the courts. Djibouti's political history, characterized by ethnic conflict and the dominance of strongmen, is explored in a new book. A new book sheds light on Uzbekistan's troubled history with the Soviet Union, blaming Soviet policies for economic and political problems. Expert Thomas Graham argues that the U.S. bears significant responsibility for the current state of U.S.-Russian relations and suggests reassessing goals and limits of power. The small country of Moldova and its breakaway province of Transnistria, under Russian military occupation, face challenges in reunification. A new book explores the complex nature of wars and argues for developing social conditions that encourage restraint and diplomacy. The draft text of the COP28 climate summit has been criticized as insufficient, with calls for a rapid decline in coal usage and net zero emissions by 2050. The European Union's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, expresses concern over the catastrophic destruction in Gaza and condemns Israel's actions. Now, let's dive into some analysis. It's clear that there are both hopeful and troubling developments around the world. In Kosovo, the growth of Girafa and its focus on e-commerce reflects optimism for the country's economy and the potential for self-sustainability. Kenny Jerry's story is a heartwarming example of how social media can be used to spread joy and make a positive impact in people's lives. However, there are also challenges that need attention. The proposed legislation in the UK raises concerns about constitutional rights and the balance of power between the government and the courts. The political histories of Djibouti and Uzbekistan shed light on the struggles faced by these countries in their post-independence periods. The analysis of U.S.-Russian relations highlights the need for a reassessment of goals and a more nuanced understanding of geopolitical competition. On the international stage, the draft text of the COP28 climate summit shows that there is still much work to be done in tackling climate change. The destruction in Gaza and the ongoing conflicts in the region are a reminder of the urgent need for peace and stability. So, what are your thoughts on these news stories? Do you have any questions or opinions? I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.